What is up? Welcome to the Smalley Talk podcast. This is your host, Josh Renko, with the number one episode of Smalley Talk Ozarks edition. And I got my good buddy, I've known him for a couple years now, and we've experienced some epic smallmouth days together. You guys will probably know him as Ill Yakin on Instagram. None other than Jake Hepner. What's up, Jake?
How's it going? It's been nice to actually have some warm weather here. I'm feeling
Yeah,
like spring is in the way. So
it is. Yeah, I'm like really tempted to go fishing this weekend, but it's Valentine's Day, so that's probably not a great move on the relationship scale. So I'm going to try to keep myself from doing that. But we have low water here. We were kind of,
oh, it's
you know,
brutal here.
yeah, we were
It's
grumbling
brutal.
about that before the podcast. It's like I mean, we got a bunch of snow. It's like we got a foot and a half of snow, but it like has been so dry that like even that snow melting is not really moving the needle much. So it sucks,
Yeah.
man.
I think we had 15 inches here in my area, and I was expecting it to take a big bump because it melted so quickly, but the river just absorbed it. It's
Yeah,
just like, nope, not gonna do anything.
I know. I feel like I would expect there to be some water right now, but it always will have this like all of a sudden the forecast pop up and it'll be raining like 6 days in a row, and then we'll get that like kind of charge. So I expect that to happen. I just was hoping it kind of ruined winter fishing for me. That's what kind of sucks. But
Yeah, it's been a really rough year. Like I love fishing. We're talking Ozarks. Ozark winter fishing is like that's like the best. And it's been kind of a down year. Part of it was we got a freeze for, like even our spring fed rivers froze, which is wild. And then
yeah,
you've got this weird period that when they thaw, at least in my experiences, if they don't usually freeze and then they thaw, it's like the fish don't bite for like a week. And that's how it was yesterday when I went out. It was just they were
yeah.
not they were not into it. So,
Well, we'll get into that a little bit more, but I think you did find some smallmouth, but
I did
they
catch
went
my first smallie of 2026, and I caught it on a
okay,
swim bait, like a
okay.
4-inch diesel minnow.
That's
So,
sick.
I didn't have to
Well,
finesse for
yeah, the fishing for me this winter has just been it sucked. But I got my first fish of the 2026 was a 20-incher though. So, good way to kick it off. But I only caught 5 fish that day and yeah, just bad winter. But so we wanted to I think just kind of giving some context here. Um for those who've been paying attention, uh, Smalley Talk as it exists, we're expanding it, kind of rethinking our content and how we want to put out podcasts. Want to be clear, like we're not going away with like their normal OG episodes. Like Chris and I will always do episodes together, but we wanted to expand it into sort of I thought about some different ways to do it. Some other podcasts like for instance, Serious Anglers, great podcast. They do a good job and they have, kind of topical based, shows that are separate from the main show. But I think one thing I wanted to stay true to our roots. I didn't want to go outside of smallmouth, but I wanted to go into like more regions. So, basically have a show that focuses on a specific region of smallmouth fishing because, unfortunately, from even though I do travel, like I know Indiana smallmouth fishing, and a lot of our audience is from that area, and I only fish rivers, so for me, my scope of what I can talk about personally is somewhat limited, and so I think it'll be interesting to get these other regions on board. And I was thinking of some like different regions. The first one is the Great Lakes, just because it's so different from what we do. And then, you know, for reasons we'll talk about in this podcast, I was like, Ozarks would be a great like show because the Ozarks is kind of, and this is speaking from an outsider, but it's kind of like it has its own like almost like a cult following within that like region. Like smallmouth fishing is I Jake described it as sacred, which I think is a good description for it. But as an outsider, me having fished there a half dozen times and experience it. It has this like almost mystique about it. Um, and there's a lot of history there, a lot that I don't understand. So I was like, man, I need to find someone that, you know, is from there and lives there and like fishes there. And Jake is the first guy I thought of just because I know him really well and I know he fishes it a lot. And so I'm going to let Jake kind of go introduce himself to you guys so you can kind of hear what his background is and what kind of fishing he does and whatever else he wants to talk about. So have at it, Jake.
Sure. Well, man, I don't even know where to start. Yeah, so I've been fishing my whole life, obviously. I feel like everybody says that when they have to like explain themselves, but like what you see me on like my pages, my social, that's been me since I was like 5 years old. I think I caught my first smallmouth when I was like 6 or 7. And I caught
Six,
it on the
seven.
same, yes,
Sorry, had to
same
do that, dude. I
lure.
have kids.
Yeah. I caught it on the same lure as, like, a largemouth. So I caught a largemouth and a smallmouth at the same time, and I just thought it was, like, the coolest thing in the world. But then I didn't catch another one for, like, till I was, like, in, like, college maybe or, like, high school. So there was, like, this huge gap because like, smallmouth fishing isn't something that, like, when you think of, like, my side of the Mississippi, you don't really think about it. You think, like, "Oh, you gotta travel to the Ozarks." Well, when I finally got the means to do that, I started doing it a lot more and getting into it. I lived up north for a while, up in Northern Illinois, and I smallmouth fished up there, and then when I came home, I was like, "Okay, I wanna really start exploring the Ozark rivers, and just, Missouri in general," because growing up around that stuff, I always heard about, like, the float culture out there and just, like, kayaking in general, because kayaking's a pretty new thing for a lot of people, but I'm here to tell you, like, canoeing and kayaking in the Ozarks has been around a lot longer than other parts of the country just because a lot of these rivers, that was really the only way you were ever gonna see them. So, like, for me, that kinda sucked me into this, and, like, I post a lot of content that's, like, all over the United States, but, like, when I'm home, I'm primarily fishing the Ozarks. Like, I think at this point, I've fished every single major Ozark River, and when I say major, there's like 5 or 6 that I kinda consider the majors, but I've fished a lot of things that people would be like, "Oh, wow, I've always wanted to go to that. I didn't even know you could do that." And there's probably like 50 of those in the Ozarks. That's the crazy part. There's so many, like, little creeks that aren't really creeks, they're just, like, tiny streams, that contain smallmouth of, like, quality smallmouth. I'm not talking, like, 15s, like, I'm talking, like, you have a legitimate shot to catch a 19 plus inch smallmouth, and I think when I first started doing this in general, like, been a lot of misconceptions that, like, Ozark equals small fish, right? Because of the Neoshos and, like, stuff, but I think there's that old kinda pinnacle of a trophy in the Ozarks was always 18, and I was like, "There's gotta be more, there's gotta be more," and I started fishing different areas, talking to the right people, finally started catching 20s, and I'm like, "Okay, this is a lot different than I was expecting," and this was years ago, and I finally kind of got to the point where I feel very confident in fishing an Ozark River, but I'm also confident in saying that it's, like, unlike any other smallmouth fishing for both good and bad reasons. Like, there's pros and cons to the Ozarks, don't get me wrong, but um, there's like a vibe to it. I think that's a good way to put it. Like, there's like a lot of culture behind it, like the float culture, and that really just spoke to me. And like, even though I think that it's harder to catch giants, like if you could say where do you want to fish the rest of your life, I might honestly have to go with the Ozarks, just because like it's just there's just something about it. Like camping on a riverbank next to a bluff, it's just like it's just that. It's just it. Like I
I
don't really
mean,
know how to
I've done it
explain it.
before. It's awesome. Like I've done the first time I fished the Ozarks. Are how what's your thought on naming stream names on this podcast? Are we going for it? Or are we just gonna keep them Stream X sort of thing? What do you think?
Um, I think it's okay to talk in generalities, so, like, general, like, stream names, so, like, I think, like, one of the bigger ones I don't think we were gonna talk about launches, though, like, that's something that I
No,
feel
no, no,
pretty
no.
strongly about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nope. I don't. I totally agree with that. I just don't. I was gonna name the river I floated, and there's really nothing like redeeming about the trip other than it was just a cool place. Like I didn't catch anything over 18. I just wanna make sure you're okay with it before I
Yeah, I'm totally
you know
fine with it. There's no
okay.
hidden gems here that people don't know the names of. It's just the launches are the tricky part.
Yeah, gotcha. So, the very first time I was in the Ozarks, I was, I would say, like, it was the first, like, 2 or 3 years that I was into kayak fishing, and this was before I really fished any tournaments. I hadn't done anything like that. I was just, like, getting into the kayak thing, and my big thing was like, "Oh, I wanna camp and fish," like, because I like camping, and that was, like I don't even remember who I talked to. Somebody was like, "Oh, you should go do the Big Piney," and I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's cool." It goes through a state forest, and,
It's
I
beautiful.
yeah, I was like, "Oh, cool." So, we drove there's an awesome story behind this, drove through the night, and I'm not gonna go into it other than to say before the trip even started, I got sprayed in the face by a skunk. So I woke up to a skunk spraying me in my face. So, but yeah, it was that's how the trip started. But yeah, I got to go do a 3-day, 2-night camping thing on the Big Piney. And I remember the first night, like, we were hammock camping, so we had, like, the hammocks that are strung up on the trees. There's not a lot of trees, like, real close to the river because there's a lot of gravel banks or gravel bars and
Yeah,
stuff.
especially if you're on, like, the gravel bar, like, good
Yeah,
luck. That's why I like that Boondocks Drifter for that. It was awesome.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I remember I had to use paracord because the ropes were had to be so long. But I remember waking up in the morning and just, like, seeing the sunrise over the bluff and, like, watching that super blue water. It was, we camped on, like, a turn, so it was depositing that gravel, like, in the corner
Mhm.
bluff just on the corner. I was like, "Man, this is it, dude, like, this is awesome." And yeah, it's for whatever reason, the Ozarks just has this, like, feeling to it, and like I said, there were moments of fishing where I'm like, "Oh, yeah, this is awesome." You catch a lot of visual eats because it's so clear, but you spook a lot of fish, and back then, I wasn't near as good of a fisherman as I am now for that type of fishing, and I struggled at times, but that river left a long-lasting mark on me, so I would 100% concur with that
That's
assessment.
a that's actually a tough river. Now there's some very quality fish on that river, but, it's clear. Like, there's I ooh, man, I'm thinking, like I can think of like 5 or 6 springs that dump in there on just like the lower end. And one thing that makes like the Ozarks unique is just how many spring-fed rivers it is. And
Mhm,
one of the reasons for that is the fact that, the Ozarks is like a plateau, right? So you got like the Ozark Mountains, but then it's like the Ozark Plateau, and like all these bluffs and rivers cut these like holes in these limestone bluffs, and all those springs are dumping out of the limestone bluffs, at 50 degrees or whatever. So it's like great in the winter in some areas, and then it's, like, really tough in the summer in some of those really clear ones because the water gets so cold, and that's what I think makes the Ozarks challenging, but it's also what makes it, like, so pretty, like, the Piney, like, both the Big and Little Piney, some of them actually probably one of my favorite rivers in the Ozarks just because of how scenic it is, because you really are, like, right in the thick of it down there, um
mhm.
because that one dumps into the Gasconade at its dump out point, which is like if you think Ozarks, you're gonna think like Gasconade, Merrimack, Current River. Those are like the big three that kind of stand out, and all those areas are just gorgeous, but they're all unique in their own way. Some are east flowing, some are north flowing. There's a lot of variety, and like the sandbar camping and just like the floating culture. That is like it's really hard to explain it until you just go do it. Because, like, if you watch a video on it, you're gonna be like, "Oh, that looks really cool." But it's one thing to, like, watch a video and, like, actually go there and experience it because, like, night fishing along the river for smallmouth is awesome in the Ozarks if you've never tried it. It's awesome because
Oh,
they eat
yeah.
all night in the Ozarks.
I've never done it, but, it's hard I've always, like, tried to wrap my head around night fishing on a river. I'm like, "I don't know exactly how that would
It's
work."
weird.
Yeah. Well, I feel like there's probably not a ton of just because of the type of rivers there's not as many strainers and stuff like there is where I'm at, where it's just like, that's, a little bit more of an agriculture thing where there's a lot of erosion, so there's not as much of
There
that where you're at, but
there are that is, like, actually one of the challenges of the Ozarks, more so on, like, the perimeter rivers is the ag impact, like, some of the more, like, fringe ones, not necessarily in the center, but the eastern Ozarks, so, like, the St. Francis areas, like, Strainer and, like, Current River, strainers can be a big deal in those. So,
mm,
especially when the
mm.
water gets up. Those eastern Ozark rivers, if it rains, good luck. Those are, like, the scariest ones. You they get roaring. So
Yeah, so I think one of the things we're gonna do in this first episode, instead of having, like, this topic, we just wanted to kind of introduce Jake, introduce the, Ozarks in general, um, so, the like, I I I really don't even know, like, can you explain, like, just where the Ozarks is, like, on a map?
yeah, so that's a tricky one. So it starts around St. Louis technically and goes south into Arkansas, and then it also goes into Oklahoma. So like you go like around like Ten Killer Lake, that's kind of like the fringe area, and like northwest Arkansas, like that little area there. And then it goes south in Missouri along the border, the whole southern range of Missouri, basically. Like, so you've got Branson on one side, and then all the way over to what is that, like Cape Girardeau type area in Missouri. That's kind of like the range. So it's actually pretty broad. And like a lot of people, when they think of the Ozarks, they think of Lake of the Ozarks, right? Makes sense. That's actually pretty far north in the Ozarks. It's still technically in the Ozarks, but you don't see a lot of rivers above that are like smallmouthy. Now, the river that creates Lake of the Ozarks, one of them, the Niangua, does have good smallmouth fishing, but like it's you don't go to Lake of the Ozarks and catch smallmouth, really. That's not like a thing. So it's like kind of deceptive. But then you go down to like Table Rock, and I think if you're thinking of like a highland reservoir, like an Ozark Highland Reservoir, like I always think of Table Rock. Like Table Rock to me is the Ozarks if you're looking for like the lake experience, which that lake is formed by the James River, which is a really good smallmouth river as well. So like there's opportunities for every type of fishing in the Ozarks. And I think that's what's kind of cool because you don't necessarily always see that. Like you don't get like that sort of fishing that's that diverse because it like encompasses such like a vast part of the region, like to cover like 3 states. Like I don't think a lot of people realize that it actually goes into Oklahoma, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
because that's what
Arkansas is part of the Ozarks, correct?
yeah, so like northern Arkansas, like the Buffalo River, the
That's why I say the
current
buffalo is, like, what I've always heard is, like, the, like, Arkansas Ozarks, which the buffalo, I think guys go out there to trout fish, right? Is it
yeah, I think
am I
sections of it do have trout. There's a lot of trout fishing in northern Arkansas, and I think now, I've always felt like the actual, like, trophy fishing for smallmouth is weaker than Arkansas and the Ozarks. Now, somebody's probably gonna be like, "Oh, that's not true," but just in my experiences, when you get down in there, it doesn't feel as good, but, like, there's still tons of smallmouth down there, like 17s, 18s, 19s, and I have no shame in catching, like, 50 18s, like, that sounds awesome, But
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and the other thing about the Ozarks is, you know, just the people there. There's some interesting, like, dynamics, but
yeah,
and I'm sure
you
you
could say
talk
that.
about that. Yeah, but I will say, like, from if I had to pick one, like, place in the United States where people are, like, obsessed with smallmouth, it is the Ozarks, and I mean, there's a couple things you can, like, look at. It's like, one, at one point, I know there was at least 2 smallmouth alliances in the Ozarks, which was interesting. It's like, there's a lot of places where there is none, and then they had 2, and I was involved with the, what was it? Bronze Fest there for a while. I went a couple years.
I
It
think
was
that's
like
actually coming up here shortly.
yeah, it was the actual so I think Ryan Walker at the time was doing it, the Ozark
Yeah,
Smallmouth Alliance. Um, so I like Ryan a lot. He's a guide now, but, and then, I don't know, just starting at Chiga and you just in Smalley Talk, you get to see like, oh man, there's a lot of like smallmouth culture out there, and even places where, like up in Minnesota, smallmouth culture kind of sucks. As good as like smallmouth fishing is up
Well,
there,
nobody
it's like
fishes for them.
yeah, it's like most of the people up there, like they are into like, the walleye and stuff like that. And so there's just not as much like down in the Ozarks. It's like, dude, like everybody loves smallmouth. So it's just there's a cool vibe that way too. So
Yeah, I think one of the like, there's a lot of deep rooted like culture with like I mentioned it earlier, like floating culture, and like everybody you run into be like, oh yeah, I grew up fishing out of a canoe on the Ozarks, right? And it's crazy, and I think that well, I don't really want to get into it in the first episode, but like one of the challenges is also that same culture, because eating a smallmouth for a lot of people is not that big of a deal. I'll just say that, like, it's not that uncommon to hear, like, "Oh, yeah, I kept a mess of smallmouth off X river," and, like, it kills us, you know? It's like, "Oh, why would you do that?" Like, if you like smallmouth fishing, like, these streams are so small, but they've been doing it for so long, you know? It's just they've been floating these rivers, like, for generations, and they keep a lot of fish sometimes, but I think you're getting a little bit better at that, but there's other challenges that obviously, that present the river with some interesting scenarios, but I do
yeah,
think, like, the people in general are starting to be more cognitive of the impact fishing has over the years and just, I don't think anyone's ever said fishing's ever as good as it used to be. Like, have you ever heard, like, someone be like, "Oh, fishing's better than it's ever been?" No, you never
no,
hear that. You always hear of how it used to be good, now it sucks. So, it's
yeah,
kinda hard to tell, like, what's, like, hyperbole and what's, like, accurate, you know?
yeah. I mean, there's the other thing. Yeah, the Ozarks. I feel like from a reputation standpoint, this is just me, like not being from there and like okay, this is what I think of. Like, I always think it's like, okay, the fish aren't very big, although as I've started to learn, I'm like, okay, well, there's some monsters there that that aren't advertised very well. I'm starting to learn, like, okay, the fishing, it's like you go to the Susquehanna and all you see people posting 20s. Like you just don't see that a ton in the Ozarks, but
It's 'cause there's not as many, right?
well, there
It's
isn't
more
as many, but there are certain places in the Ozarks that are
right.
pretty dynamite. And in fact, I would say the upper end of smallmouth might even be better than like a place like Susquehanna, just because the growing season's longer and like they have that southern like
Milder winters, yeah.
yeah, they have that they get yeah. We there's let's just say this. There's been some verified sevens out of the Ozarks in a river, which is crazy.
Multiple
Like,
rivers, in fact.
yeah,
I can think of
crazy.
at least 3 rivers, maybe 4 if you're really wanting to get technical, that have produced, like, fish of that caliber, which is
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, that's nuts. Like, absolutely nuts. But the fishing, like I've always like it's an experience to go there for a different reason than like anywhere else. But like I said, the culture is cool, the scenery is awesome. And so if you haven't gone to the Ozarks and you're a smallmouth guy, like you should definitely go because it's not all about chasing a trophy, although I, there are trophies there. There's some giants and
Dude, I spent all
that's
year
where you
this year
won't name streams, by the way. We're not gonna be like,
I
oh yeah,
spent
see."
all year this year chasing a PB, right? Like, I was just stuck at that, like, 20 and 3 quarters mark. I went to the Upper Mississippi, I went to the Allegheny, I went to the Susquehanna twice, I went to the Stanton River, I went to all these, like, j crazy rivers, and I come home, and then in late November, like, right as it was turning winter, I catch a 21 in a stream that a lot of people say is cooked. Like, it's not good anymore. I just, like, smoke a 21, and I'm just like, "How does this even happen?" It's almost like it was, like, meant to be that I finally, like, caught one of that size, but it's like I caught it at home. I didn't catch it at all these world-class smallmouth fisheries. Not to
I
say that
bet
they weren't
you
in there.
I bet you in the next 6 months you catch another PB. That's like, in my experience, that's just how it goes, dude. It's like
Yeah.
you have like it's like this just luck of the draw thing with those upper end fish like that. Sometimes you just like, oh shoot, yeah, then you catch like 2 or 3 in a year. It's kind of weird. Um, the other thing about the Ozarks I think is cool is that the fly fishing culture. It's definitely has, I would say, next to maybe like, I'm talking about for smallmouth. I'm not talking about,
Yeah.
you know, in out west for trout, but like smallmouth fly fishing, Ozarks, and then maybe like the eastern, like kind of that like Virginia, West Virginia. There's a lot of fly fishing there. It's pretty strong. It's like its own little kind of thing inside of that fishing culture.
It
So
definitely is. I just got done telling somebody that I feel like fly fishing in the Ozarks is, like, about as strong as it gets, and it's because it's, like, such a good place to fly fish because the rivers are shallower. You can wade fish a lot of the rivers. I mean, with exceptions. Obviously there's some that you can't necessarily wade fish, but I think it's very fly fisherman friendly. And the state of Missouri actually does a really good job of kind of outlining too where you can go. And I just think the river's set up so well for fly fishing. And I'm not a very good fly angler. I wish I was, but I really kind of respect it to an extent. Like
yeah,
fly fishing for smallmouth is just like
it's awesome.
it's not easy. It can't be easy. I mean, it's just like it's hard enough to catch them on conventional, let alone, get them to eat something else. So I think it's really cool. And like you see so many people, like especially like as you get further south in the Ozarks, you see a lot more of it. Like there's a ton down there, even on like Taneycomo. You'll see people, they're obviously down there for trout, but like they'll break away into some of the other smaller smallmouth streams. You see tons of people down there fishing. So
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, I left out Michigan too. I feel like Michigan has a pretty strong fly fishing, culture for smallmouth. Um, but yeah, man, it's a it's just a cool area. Like I said, if you haven't been there, you should check it out. And this show, I think the plan is to do, about once a month, do a podcast, and I'm sure there'll be some like different guests and some interesting topics and stuff like that. I know Jake's already mentioned a couple of them. Uh, and part of this show isn't just for entertainment; it's also to bring awareness to things. Because, like any fishery, there's just a lot of um, there's a lot of headwinds to making that it the best they can be, and some of those are external factors that are out of your control, but some of them are human induced and influenced. And like I know, like where I'm from, I see the writing on the wall already. All these AI data centers going in, like we're already dealing with low water, like that stuff is like a threat to our rivers because it's pulling a bunch of water out of the system. And pollution, I just saw a big expose on what river was that, the
the
Potomac.
Potomac,
Did you see
yeah,
that?
it was
Yeah,
disgusting. I felt so
yeah,
bad for those guys because it's like, could you imagine if millions of gallons of sewage was going into your smallmouth river?
yeah,
It'd suck.
it's yeah, there's nothing you can do about it. It'll probably have like years and years of lasting effects. But the Ozarks has their own challenges. Like some of them are like you were talking about with the catch and release type of stuff, which is where I first heard "free the fighter." It was from Ryan Walker. It's like he used to use that phrase all the time. And like I think one of the things we want to do with the show is like not clickbaity type stuff, but really just like challenge the status quo of like, hey, here's what's going on. Get people's opinions on it. Get people that know what they're talking about, that have seen, firsthand of like, oh, this is I've seen this going on. And, I don't want to get into anything on this episode necessarily, but we were even just talking about something that's probably pretty controversial in that region that I think just needs talked about, and it's like we're definitely not going to be preachy here. I don't think Jake it will ever be preachy as far as like, hey, you should or shouldn't do this. But this is more of like a journalistic thing. If you just like, hey, this is what it is, and then you can sort of form your own opinion on it, and using science, using data, using interesting guests like that, we can bring some awareness to some of the stuff. So I'm looking forward to seeing it because people care about the streams down there, and yeah, they need a voice for sure.
And I think one of the challenges of the Ozarks, just on like a broad level, is that when you do something to rivers and we'll just call them streams because I think that's what's more generally accepted. The streams here, they're much smaller, right? Right.
Yeah,
So like the impact is bigger. The impact, like you think like you're doing like, oh, I'll just take a couple 20s out twice a month and eat them. That has, like, such, like, a ripple effect, and I'm not even anti keeping, like, I'm pretty pro, like, if you catch it, like, that's your decision, if it's legal, right? Like, who are we
mhm,
to would I prefer you release smallmouth? Yeah, obviously, but,
yeah,
it's just, like, you can't please everybody with some of these restrictions, but, like, the impact on smaller streams is just something that, like, we can't even fathom because they don't have, like, like the Upper Mississippi, you and I could go up there and keep everything we catch for, like, 2 weeks straight, and you probably wouldn't even notice it, right? Like,
no,
it's
no,
different. But you wanna
yeah,
know how they got to that point? It's all catch and release up there.
yeah.
So, there is sound logic that, like, in river system, catch and release does help smallmouth populations, so
What I do know that there have been some like legislative things with catch and release in the Ozarks. What what's going on with that right now? This is like certain rivers or certain sections of rivers that they have.
well, yeah, so there's closed season on certain sections, which are like the blue ribbon, I think is technically what they call them, and you can't keep them between like a certain period, which does help, but it also, I'm pretty sure that period doesn't really overlap with spawn, so it's kind of weird, It's like I don't know, it's like it kind of doesn't seem like it really solves a lot of the issues, but I think the Missouri Department of Conservation does a good job of like at a base level, but I definitely think they could be doing more to kind of like assist the populations to make sure because it's got to be a good money like the tourism aspect. Could you imagine if like suddenly like smallmouth fishing in Missouri collapsed? I feel like that would suck for them. They'd lose so much money and like revenue and stuff. And like it's hard to rebuild a stream. You can restock a lake, but like fixing a stream, you just can't really do that. It takes like 20 years to grow even one good smallmouth, let alone like a whole stream.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's what gets lost a little bit to the meat eaters, we'll call them, is that a stream smallmouth, especially one that's good size, like we're 18 inches or bigger. Like, that fish is pretty old. Like, it could be a decade old, could be even older, and, you take that out of the system, it's like, well, how long does it take to replace that? And, there's streams where you can fish, a week and you won't see many fish over 18 inches, and that is some of it's due to other factors, but the point is the smallmouth grow slow in a river. They take a long time to get big, and like there is a point in which a stream can get overpopulated, and I haven't seen that very often. It's usually the opposite problem, but select harvest is I know it's important for some bodies of water. I don't know in a stream if you're really, like, benefiting it by harvesting them at all, especially
I don't
streams
think you
that
are personally. Like I just
yeah,
there's the problem is like in a vacuum it would make sense, right? But the problem arises is that there's already other factors that are impacting the stream's
floods,
population.
otters,
Floods,
pollution.
low water. Low water is actually a huge problem. Like, I don't think people realize what a detriment agriculture can be to a stream because when
Oh,
you get
yeah.
those eroded banks and stuff, like the water fluctuates a lot worse than it should be. There's not places for these fish to go and spawn. You get 2 or 3 seasons in a row of high, low, high, low, high, low, and they don't get a good spawn, you can tell. Like,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
like, "Man, where are all the 15s and 16s that I'm used to?" It's like, uh,
Yeah. Missing
I think
classes.
water level is just such a big problem, and everyone thinks
Well,
like, "Oh, it's just nature," but a lot of it is agriculture, unfortunately. It's just kind of eroded the areas that were typically maintaining the banks of the river on like a more natural level. And, these fish in the Ozarks aren't used to mud. That's not what they're meant to live in. They're used to high water and it still being, within reason. I mean, obviously all water is going to get muddy when it gets like super high, but like those high water events the last 2 years, I'm actually really worried about the next 4 or 5 seasons because I don't think we had a good spawn last year or the year before.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's, even in a river where everything is perfect, you can get blown out spawns like multiple years in a row just because the rain,
Yeah.
it sucks. And exactly what you said, it gets low, they make beds, then all of a sudden it blows the beds out, and then they don't, they abandon them and don't ever spawn. Um,
It moves fish
yeah,
a lot too. Like they get trapped in
yeah,
areas that, they don't normally prefer. I think that's kind of one of the struggles I'm dealing with this winter is I think a lot of fish are trapped from the low water. And so like a lot of the really good wintering holes this year are just vacant. And I'm saying
mm.
that with like a lot of confidence because like you go through there and typically like you'll know if there's fish in there, but there's just none in there. It's like, where are they?
So I'm gonna shift to focus a little bit because I want to ask you a couple questions about just Ozark, more like the fishing aspect of it, because I think, yeah, we're raising awareness, we're talking about issues and stuff, but I also think people tune in this podcast, they want to hear the juice. So as it relates to just like, I'm going to put a hypothetical scenario out there for you. So like, let's say you you are looking at a period of fishing from January 1st to December 31st, right? So a full calendar year,
Yeah.
and you can only fish Ozark streams. You can't go outside of there. It's the only place you can go. And you had a tackle box that you could build out. You could have unlimited lures within that tackle box, but you could only pick 5 different things to fish with. What 5 things are you choosing for the Ozarks, and tell me why?
Ooh. Okay. So this is an interesting one because I feel like Ozark fishing is evolving a little bit where you're seeing more of the big baits coming into play. Um, I definitely think that I would almost always have like a 5 to 7 inch glide bait because
Okay.
at the end of the day, we all want to break our PB, right? And I think that pretty much from March 1st until December 1st, maybe even slightly later, a big glide bait has probably one of the best chances of catching an absolute slob. Like, and I've seen it multiple times. I know it works, but it's just such a counterintuitive choice when you think about Ozark fishing because when you think about Ozark fishing, you're thinking like little tiny things, like finesse and whatnot, which
Mhm.
absolutely works. But I think you would never catch me without having that in my back pocket, right? And then in jerkbait of some design, I don't care what brand. I obviously like Mega Bass and Vision 110s. If that's not any, I got all these back there. I think a
Mhm.
jerkbait will work from January 1st to December 31st. No, no exception. Like it'll work all year. It's best on the
Suspending
book end.
or both, or what do you,
The what now?
do you fish mostly suspending jerk baits? Is that your
Yeah. I have experimented with some of the newer, like, shallow running ones to some
Mhm.
good success, and those float. But if it's cold, you definitely want suspending. I think if it's warmer, you can get a little bit more aggressive with, like, heavier hooks and floating and stuff like that. But I think typically out of a box, a Vision 110 or, like, a Smithwick Rogue lights out. Like, and it's
So,
just
yeah, the like, the jerkbait thing is interesting, like, looking at the Ozarks, because you talk about, like, there's a lot of history there, and if you ask, like, any old timer, like, what did you fish with? What's your best day smallmouth fishing? You're gonna hear likely 2 answers. You're gonna hear an inline spinner. That's like those guys all fish bucktail kinda inline spinners, and then you're gonna hear an original Rapala jerkbait. That's like, and that is a jerkbait, but it's a floating jerkbait. So I was just curious if you're using any of the floating stuff there. So
Yeah, I mean, those floating ones have their place, and they obviously worked. I mean, if you ask anybody in the Ozarks, what's like, if you went out and pulled people today, like a classic Ozark angler, you know what the number one response you're gonna get is?
Mm-mm.
A wiggle wart. The
Okay.
OG wiggle
Yeah.
wart. I'm not talking about
Yeah.
the new ones. Now they do throw the new ones now because it's hard to find the old ones. But I would say in most hardcore Ozark anglers right now will always say wiggle wart, and they will throw those like till there's ice on the water, and they'll catch them. They fish them
The
so slow, like
Okay,
so
so that's the
slow.
thing. They're fishing them slow.
And I mean, my buddy caught one when it was like 38 degrees on a wiggle wart, and you know, that's about as cold as it gets, really, because like after that, the
Mhm.
rivers tend to freeze. So, um, wigglewort is like the staple. Like if you pulled anybody like a red wigglewort, like a crawdad colored wigglewort, that's the Ozark juice right there. So surprise to nobody. If you're an Ozark guy, you're like, yeah, duh.
Yeah, no joke. Um, so so you have your glide bait, which I haven't announced this publicly, but we may be having something in that category coming at Achigan, so just hang tight. And then you have a jerk bait. What's your number three that you're going with?
So I think you got to have a jig in the Ozarks. The crawfish population is just such a big part of their diet, especially when the bite gets tough. Like you can flip wood, you can drag it down the middle, you can throw it into the seams, you can pretty much do anything with a jig. I think like a little like 3/8 the 5/16 ounce jig with like just a small trailer is perfect. I don't really throw a lot of big jigs in the Ozarks, and it's just because like I've done a lot of like cross surveying and stuff in my years of youth when I used to do like water surveying, and I know that although they can get big in the Ozarks, and I've seen some giant ones around Table Rock, don't get me wrong, crawfish tend to be smaller in these streams. So I've always really liked like a nice little compact finesse jig just because
Mhm.
it's so versatile. And I think like I kind of like saying that out loud, I realized like, oh man, I probably didn't throw the jig enough last season.
Yeah, that's like usually one of those things when you do these exercises, you're like, yeah, man, I'm gonna actually start. And then the next move is to go on Tackle Warehouse and buy like a half dozen jigs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cause like a jig just catches fish, man. And like I've caught a lot of really nice smallmouth on jigs. And you know, I almost wonder if, like, yesterday when I was out, should I have thrown the jig? Maybe, like, it would've been a little bit bulkier than my finesse presentation, and they would've been like, "Oh, okay, I'll eat that," but, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but I think a jig is you can't pick up a jig on an Ozark River at any point in the year and be making the wrong call, um,
Yeah.
and I think most people would agree with that who fish these rivers because it's just
Smallmouth always eat crawls, man. It doesn't matter what part of the country you're in. It's just part of their diet. So Um, all right, so we got a glide bait, we have a jerk bait,
jerkbait.
a jig. What's number four?
So, number 4 is gonna be a spinnerbait.
Okay,
I probably
I
have
like that.
caught more fish on a spinnerbait than more smallmouth on a spinnerbait than any lure. Probably maybe that and a jerkbait. It's like really close, but I think a spinnerbait too is like one of those things that you can throw pretty much all year. But the thing about a spinnerbait is I feel like you can fish those so aggressive, especially in like pre-spawn. Like it's like the bait for me. Or if like the water's muddy, it's like if the water's up and a little bit muddy, dude, the spinnerbait just, like, wrecks them, and I've had some really good days on it, just
I
everywhere
mean,
with smallmouth, but
spinnerbait is yeah. I I don't even talk about it anymore because I kind of feel like people are going away from it a little bit, and
yeah, they're
I'm
going to
okay.
chatterbait.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with
Yeah.
that. So, yeah, they still work. All right. So what's your number five? What are you going with number five?
Oh, man, so this is a tough one because like, we already talked about the wiggle wart, but I truthfully don't throw it a lot, and I think that really at the end of the day, the thing that you're gonna find me using as, like, my 5th lure is gonna be some sort of finesse, like a small tube, a Ned rig, or I don't know, like any sort of like Z-Man little finesse lure. I have to have one of those. I almost always bring one, and I've caught big fish on it. I mean, all the fish I caught I think 2 of the fish I caught yesterday were on finesse. Just because like when the bite gets tough, especially in the summer, like it's like a guaranteed. If you pull like those little bitty tubes or like a little bitty TRD tickler in front of a big smallmouth in the summer and it's just glued to the bottom and it sees it, it's gonna eat it.
Um, yeah, that's a good, I mean, kind of that Ned rig type of bite. I feel like if you're a smallmouth guy in a river, if you don't have that tied on, like you're gonna miss some opportunities. Like I've always said, like if you like see a smallmouth and it doesn't see you, like you should get your Ned rig right out, because if you know that you can have a shot at it, like that you're gonna have your best chance of getting that thing to eat with if you put that in front of its face. Whereas like you run a spinnerbait across the face, like yeah, there's a lot of fish that would eat that, but there's also a lot of fish that you'll scare off and that sort of thing. And that's more of like a search bait, like you're trying to cover water. But a Ned rig type of bait, and I actually um I have a new uh rig that I'm gonna be trying out this year, and I'm not gonna talk about in the podcast because I've made that mistake before. And then people message me, what kind of hooks do you use? I got some, I'll talk to you about it offline, but um it's in that same category, but it's different. But yeah, I don't know if I'm like looking at that tackle box, the only thing I'm gonna be like, I don't know. The jig and the crawl thing are both really similar, and I
It's
feel like
true.
you could vary it up. I would probably replace one of those with a fluke. That's just me. But I don't fish Ozarks a lot, so I don't know how popular
A lot
that
of people like flukes in the Ozarks. I think that that would be a fair change, but then you could also argue that the jerkbait
top
will do the
water.
same thing.
Top water.
Dude, I
Yeah.
didn't you know what? I actually feel kinda bad. I probably should have picked top water for one of them. Honestly, we
Yeah.
probably should swap the jig out with top water because truthfully, like, the last 2 seasons, I always think, like, I should throw in the jig more, and the reason I'm not throwing it is because 'cause I've been burning top water. There's some rivers in the Ozarks, and I don't know what it is, I think it's just the way they fish, where it could be 105 degrees, bluebird skies, and they'll just be smoking top water all day long. Like,
Yeah, top water is one of those things I feel like you can't replace it. You cannot replace like a top water bite when they're on it. Not to mention it's like the most fun fishing that you can have. But it's like if they want top water, sometimes that's what you got to throw, you know?
and it's, like, really successful to throw it if you know that the fish are eating, you're almost better off throwing topwater over everything else because of how shallow
Mhm.
the riffles are. So, like, if they're
Yeah.
pushed up into a riffle and you know that, your best chance to catch that fish a lot of times is actually to throw the topwater because you're gonna get them to strike. They're gonna think that the minnows coming up that riffle are
Yeah.
coming, and they'll swipe at it. And, like, Ozark smallmouth, like, I've caught, like I think I caught, like, last year I think it was like a 19 and 3/4. It was like just shy of 20, and it was sitting in no less than like 3 inches of water. Like, it was, like, back out of the water, just, like, waiting for the wake bait to come by, and it just, like, smoked it. And I don't think he would have hit anything else because it just wouldn't have looked right coming through the
What
water, you know? It's like
so if you had to choose a top water, if you're subbing the jig for a top water, what you don't have to say like the brand and everything, but just like what style of top water are you using?
so yeah, that's a good one because 'cause I've actually had, like, kind of a renaissance when it comes to that, and you'll probably be like, "Oh, yeah, I saw you doing that." And it's the wake bait. Dude,
Yeah,
wake
wig baits
baits are
are
just
sick.
they're king,
Yeah.
man. They're superior to every top water in my book right now.
Yeah, I would probably go with the little finesse buzzbait. You've seen me throw that a decent
Yeah,
amount.
that'd be a good
So it's
one.
just I just can cover a lot of water with it, and you get it's just fun to fish with. But that's a solid thing. I think those are the kind of topics that guys will like, and I think we'll dig into more of that sort of tackle nerdy stuff in some of these episodes. And one of the reasons I tapped Jake on the shoulder for this was that I would say Jake is one of the like bigger like um gearhead type guys that I know, just because he appreciates like the higher end stuff, but you're not a snob about it. So I feel like a lot of guys that like high end, they're like, oh, this is, you'll fish a cheap lure, but you also like fishing some of the like real high end JDM stuff. So I think it's a good, it'll be good for our audience to hear some of that, because I know you've talked about, like we were just talking about that thing, uh, the Achigan thing, um, and you had turned me on to a swim bait that was like I really didn't know much about. And then I started looking into it. I'm like, oh, these are cool. I guarantee smallmouth will crush them, and they're not like overly expensive. Even for a JDM bait, like,
Dude,
oh
they
man,
last a long time, the one we're talking about. Like,
yeah,
I've got
yeah.
one
I was,
hanging behind me. It's like the OG
yeah,
one.
yeah. I'm excited to throw it, because I was looking at. I got to do surgery on one of them because I need to take the harness out
Dude, the
to.
hookup ratio on those things is like, I mean, you saw it with the little makeshift munchie I made. Same
Yeah.
concept. Like when they
Yep.
eat it, it's like they eat
Yep.
it.
Yeah, for
So
sure. Well, I am getting a text from my wife that we have to go to a nephew's basketball game. So we gotta wrap this up. But this has been fun. This was a very organic, easy podcast to record. I feel like there's a lot of good, just kind of entry level stuff in here that just like covered, just kind of sets the stage for what this Ozark show is going to be about. But do you have anything else, Jake, that you wanted to touch on before we signed off?
No, I mean, I'm just excited to do this. I'm actually excited to learn more than anything because I've never proclaimed myself to be an expert at all things like smallmouth and Ozarks because there's always like, there's people who've been fishing these rivers for as long as I've been alive. So that's the thing I'm
Yeah.
most excited about, having some cool guests talking about cool topics. And I plan on exploring a lot of new Ozark rivers this year. We might not talk about the specific launch locations, but I'm sure we'll touch on it a little bit. So
Yeah. I might do you know Nate Carnes? Do you know who he is?
no, I'm not familiar with him.
He's the guy who does the, like, smallmouth flag, like those stickers.
Oh,
The
okay.
he's from the Ozarks. He's designed a bunch of the like Ozark um the pig smallmouth stickers. Have you seen
Yeah.
those?
Mhm.
He does those. I'm gonna
There's a
see. Go ahead. What were you saying?
I was gonna say there's a lot of cool artwork that comes out of the Ozarks. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many
It,
talented guys.
There yeah, there is. But I know Nate personally, so I might, we're gonna be doing, like, a different variation of the Smalley Talk logo for each show, and I haven't got either one of them finalized yet, but I might tap Nate and see if he wants to design it, because I think it'd be cool to have somebody from the Ozarks design it, and because I think it'll be neat when you guys will see the, sort of stuff pop up in your feed. It'll have its own like a little logo. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, man, it was great talking with you, Jake. And I'll get off here so I don't get in trouble. And it's Valentine's Day, so we gotta take care of our wives and make sure they're getting attention. But yeah, it was awesome, man. I'm sure we'll fish together multiple times this year, and maybe we'll do a little trip down the Ozarks, maybe do a little on the water episode. That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that'd be
So
dope.
yeah, I'm all about it. So all right, man. Well, that's all I got. I'll let you do Free the Fighter since this is your thing. So go sign us off on Free the Fighter.
All right, until next time, guys. Free the fighter.
Heck yeah. All right.